because I think in February or March, Reverend Danny Hyde from a URC in California put on his Facebook post a link to this blog, URC Psalmody, which is a topic that definitely caught my attention right away. So, I mean, this was about 11 o'clock at night, so I clicked on the link, and I ended up just reading these posts until like 1 or 2 in the morning. I was just infatuated with this blog because, I mean, in all the talk about the Psalter hymnal and about psalmody and the URC, I've found it very hard to find a resource that's kind of fair and balanced in its treatment of the subject. And I was really impressed with this blog. And for those of you that know me well, this is kind of a surprising thing because I'm kind of philosophically anti-blogging. And so for me to be this into a blog was really an exciting thing. And so I was just regularly reading this blog, and then one day I clicked on the About Me section on the blog and was quite surprised and pleased to find that the author was 16 years old from New York City. And I was really impressed. I mean, Paul writes to Timothy, don't let anyone despise you because of your youth. You know, if you have something to say for God's church and he's put on your heart to say it, say it. And I was really impressed with what Michael was doing. And then one fateful day, he made the mistake of quoting me on his blog. And so I figured I need to get in touch with this guy. And so I started writing back and forth to him. And then I went out and visited him when I was doing pulpit supply at his church. And that opened the door to a great relationship. I now occasionally write things on the blog, but I think his content is usually the better stuff. And so I've just been really impressed with what he's doing. I think his blog, URC Psalmody, fills a niche that's not often, that I haven't found anywhere else on the internet or anywhere else in print. A resource for discussing singing the Psalms in a URC context, you know, with the Blue Psalter hymnal and also with the work that we're doing with the OPC for a new Psalter hymnal. And so I'm really excited that he's here. I'm really excited to hear what he has to say, and now he'll say it. And there are handouts being distributed even as we speak.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's great to have such a good sales pitch right at the beginning. Yeah, when Jim first said to me that he wanted me to teach an adult Sunday school class at this church, I was sure that there was something that I didn't understand. I thought, you know, maybe he was inviting me to the adult Sunday school class to hear a special speaker or something, but it was with very mixed reaction that I received his news. I was very happy about it and at the same time very nervous, and that's the same blend of feelings that I have right now. But I hope that somehow, if this class does nothing else, I just would like to share with you my love for the Psalms and how we can inspire a fresh love of them in the coming generations. So in Reformed churches, we usually pride ourselves on loving the old hymns, and we sang some of them today. We sang "It Is Well With My Soul." That's a great hymn. We sang "Holy, Holy, Holy." We sang many, you know, there are many great hymns in our repertoire, and it's really, you know, wonderful that we should have them. But when I hear people arguing for the use of the old hymns, it usually gets me thinking, why are the old hymns so good? Why do we want them so much? And I guess there's a lot of reasons for that. They're a lot more doctrinally sound, usually. They're usually very, they reflect a broad range of Christian emotions, and we can really relate to them very well. They're really a valuable, just a wonderful part of our heritage and something that we should never forget. But sadly, what we seem to often forget is that the Psalms are completely on the same level as hymns in all of those regards, and probably even better. completely representative of the full range of Christian emotions. You have psalms that talk about praising God. You have psalms that talk about despair. You have psalms that express anger at the sin of the wicked. And what's more is that these aren't by any means unsingable. I mean, we have this blue Psalter hymnal, which has 310 arrangements of the 150 psalms. And for the most part, they're beautifully written, they're very singable, they sing just like a regular hymn. And yet so often they seem to be forgotten and relegated to the first half of the book, which we don't often sing from. I know my own experience, I really didn't start to love the Psalms until very recently, and when I had to really start digging into the Psalter hymnal to learn more. So I guess I should share a bit of my personal background, not because I want to toot my own horn, certainly, because there isn't much to toot about, but just to share with you how this started. With the last name Kearney, you can tell that I'm not Dutch. Did not grow up in the URC. My family is Irish and other European mixes. My dad grew up Roman Catholic and my mom grew up Lutheran. And God brought them together and brought them through a long spiritual journey, which went through the Pentecostal and charismatic tradition, just the evangelical, non-denominational tradition, and it wasn't until I was about 5 that we first started going to West Sayville Reformed Bible Church, and we became members there shortly thereafter. So that's the church I've mostly grown up in, but at the same time, I don't have those same preconceived ideas about the Psalter hymnal, say. So I was, learning it for the first time rather than growing up with it as the, default songbook. But even then, it wasn't until about 2010 that I started to really become interested in the Psalms. At Synod 2010, the copies of the URC hymn book proposal were released, and I got one, and I started looking through it and reviewing it. The fruit of that labor ended up being an 88-page report, but along the way, I started to really love the Psalms and want to learn more about them. So there were a lot of other things that started to converge at this point, all by God's grace, certainly. At the Reformed Youth Services Convention in 2011, I got the opportunity to play on the pipe organ at Dordt College and got to hear 800 young people singing "O Come My Soul," Psalm 103. And that was just a wonderful experience and totally revitalized my desire to learn more about church music. And then at Synod 2012, which was convened less than 2 hours from our house, I just volunteered to say, is there anything I can do? And the chairman of the planning committee wrote back to me and said, well, can you play the organ? And I was like, well, sort of. So he said, well, we'll have you play the organ. And again, playing to accompany 200 men singing the Psalms was just wonderful. And around that same time, I was just starting the blog. And I don't like to think of it as a blog either. As when I started it, I really wanted it to be more of a discussion forum because my thoughts aren't always that well thought out. I really wanted to just know what other musicians and members of the URC were thinking about church music and how we could work to increase our love of those psalms and hymns. So I guess the next thing would be to just look at the Psalms and what we have in them. We've got these 150 songs in the Bible, in the Old Testament. They, as I said before, they represent a broad range of emotions. They can apply to all areas of our lives. And the more you sing them, the more you start to love them and memorize them and be able to just apply them to your lives. So that's why I think they're so important. That's why I'm here today, just to sort of try to share that love of the Psalms with you. So I think you all have your handouts by now. In true sermon style, I tried to make 3 main points. Where we've been, where we are, where we're going. And I certainly want to spend the most time on the last point, because the first 2 are, basic history of psalm singing, which might be interesting, but it really is not as important as the application. So I'll try to go pretty quickly through this part. So I'm sure you know that the Psalms are the songbook of Old Testament Israel. Many of them were composed by King David, and there's specific references that they were used in Old Testament worship. But it's not as commonly known that the Psalms actually continued to be the songbook used even by the early church. Of course, you have the Paul's commands in Ephesians 5:19 and Colossians 3:16, where he says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs." And there's some disagreement about whether uninspired hymns are included in that. Some people say that it just refers to psalms and only psalms. But I would certainly question that view, but at the very least, the Psalms are certainly, they should form a big part of our repertoire in the church. And along that line, there's plenty of historical evidence that psalm singing was a vital part of the early church, even for centuries, really. It wasn't until the Middle Ages, as the Roman Catholic Church began to arise, and suddenly there were monastic choirs. They were singing the Psalms. They were still singing the Psalms, but they were singing them in Latin, and no one could understand them. And that led to the Roman Catholic Mass and other aspects of that tradition. So by the time of the Reformation, the church was in desperate need of a revived interest and philosophy of singing. So there were 2 main avenues by which that recovery came. One was John Calvin's work. He created the Genevan Psalter in 1562. That became the main songbook for French Protestants, and it also spread to the Netherlands and became the Dutch Psalter. So we have a close connection with that. And then Calvin's Genevan Psalter also influenced the Puritans over in England. And about 1650, the Scottish Psalter came out. That formed the basis of, we still sing many of those songs today. Even if we think of them as hymns, they're really based on the Psalms. So those 2 traditions sort of have converged in today's church. We've got the Dutch Reformed and Continental Reformed tradition, and then we have the Presbyterian tradition, and we have aspects of both of those in our services. But there was sadly a second decline in psalmody in the 1700s and 1800s because Isaac Watts and Charles Wesley began writing very loosely paraphrased versions of psalms and some completely uninspired hymns. And while those were not, most of them were by no means bad, they were still very sound and good to sing, but churches latched onto them so quickly that they started to not sing the psalms. And that really, by the mid-1800s, there was hardly any psalm singing tradition left in European and American churches. Now, closer to home, does anyone know when the Christian Reformed Church was established?
1856
Yeah, 1856 or 1857. And one of the founding principles of the Christian Reformed Church, which set it apart from the Netherlands Reformed Church and the what today is the RCA, was that they were committed to singing only the Psalms. That was the CRC's tradition for over about 70 years. They sang them in Dutch, of course, because the CRC was Dutch until probably the turn of the century. But at least there was that recovery of Dutch psalm singing in our denomination. Now, coincidental with that, as the 20th century came, there was also a recovery in English psalm singing. We had in 1887 the United Presbyterian Psalter, which wasn't complete, and it was a step forward. I don't think it was the complete 150 psalms, and it wasn't perfect by any means. But in 1912, that Psalter was revised, and that 1912 Psalter became the groundwork for the Psalter hymnal. So we can be very thankful for that book. It's still used today by certain Reformed denominations. I managed to pick up a used copy, and I love it. It's great to look at, and it has some real gems in there that we don't even sing anymore. So we can be grateful for that. Now back to the CRC. In 1928, the CRC voted to allow hymns, but they made clear that the singing of psalms was still a divine ordinance, whereas the singing of hymns could be left to the freedom of the churches. So as a result of that decision in 1928, we had the first Psalter hymnal published in 1934, which took the best of the 1912 Psalter and also used new settings from the Dutch Psalter. And there were many scholars who worked on that, among them Dewey Westra. There was H.J. Van Andel, many different scholars, and among them Seymour Sweats, who worked on some of the hymn settings. So that 1934 Psalter led to the 1959 and 1976 Psalter hymnal, which we use today. This blue book is really just a revision of the older book. So that's a very brief history of the history of psalm singing. It brings us up to the URC, and that's the past. Any questions on this point before I go to the URC situation? Okay. So we have where we are, the situation in the URCNA. It's very interesting to note the URC's position on singing psalms. Article 39 of our church order says, "The 150 psalms shall have the principal place in the singing of the churches. Hymns which faithfully and fully reflect the teaching of the Scripture as expressed in the three forms of unity may be sung, provided they are approved by the consistory." So, even though hymns may be sung, the church order is very clear that the 150 psalms have the principal place. And that's really unique. I mean, it's very unique among churches in general today, where, we consider a church traditional if it sings hymns at all, let alone psalms. But even among Reformed churches, even the CRC, before, say 50 years ago, the church order in the CRC pretty much placed psalms and hymns on the same level and basically said, well, as long as you sing out of the Psalter hymnal, it's all right, whether it's psalms or hymns. So we can be very grateful that the URC has made that commitment to singing the psalms. Now, coming out of the CRC as a very small and young denomination, the URC has used the blue CRC Psalter hymnal for the past 15 years or so, since its founding. Now, this book has, as I said, 310 versions of the 150 psalms, and it also has 183 hymns. And if you go to just about any URC church, you can find that songbook. It's pretty much the universal URC songbook. Now, other churches also have supplemental collections of hymns and psalms. There's the Trinity Hymnal and the Trinity Psalter. There's the Book of Psalms for Singing, which is a Reformed Presbyterian book. There are lots of additional hymnals that are used and bulletin inserts of newer songs, newer hymns. But the thing is that although we have the Blue Psalter hymnal, there's much reason to want a revised version of the Psalter hymnal as we move into the 21st century. Not because we want to change what our forefathers put down, and not because we want to liberalize our churches or modernize them, but simply because the Psalter hymnal isn't perfect. And as we're becoming a new denomination, it's wonderful to have our own songbook that we can start a new psalm singing heritage with. So that brings us to the where we're going part. We have the URC and OPC Psalter Hymnal Project. How many of you have heard of the URC Psalter Hymnal Project before today? Okay, good. Just about everyone. That's great. Now, what have you heard about the URC Psalter Hymnal? Do you have any, what have you heard, what are your positive thoughts about it? Like, how do you think it will help us? Yes, Mr. Sweats.
It's going to translate some of the Psalms into the current version of the Bible that we're reading?
Right, translating the Psalms into a contemporary translation of the Bible, which is great for newcomers to the Reformed faith. Yes?
I think it's going to give us that fresh set of eyes. That's the positive kind. The concern is that the fresh set of eyes take us too far off track. I think I certainly have faith in the office bearers and the committee members that won't happen, but it's as you know, the entire question of revising the Psalter hymnal has been one that's pretty much lived with us since our foundation.
Sure. Basically, the Psalter hymnal, really, we can look at it with a fresh set of eyes if we revise it, but that same fresh set of eyes could prove to be our undoing if we're not careful in how we modernize it. Anyone else? Yes?
I would hope that it'd be more of the songs in the blue hymnal versus the songs that where there might be errors, theological errors, that those would be the songs.
Yeah, absolutely. That even in the Psalter hymnal, as great a stanchion of Reformed theology as it may be, some of the hymns especially do contain things that really are not consistent with Reformed doctrine. So at least we have this chance, and it's a very valuable chance, to go through those songs and say, how can we make sure that we're actually singing Reformed truth and not just sentimental things that aren't really true. So those are all really good. Yes?
Are we going to update the language?
Are we going to, yeah. That's a big point of controversy. Are we going to update the these and thous to modern language? If you were to ask my personal view on that, which is just my personal view, I would say when we have the old hymns, like Great is Thy Faithfulness, How Great Thou Art, things like that, those we really risk a lot when we try to change the words to be more modern. And a lot of times they're really not as hard to understand as people claim that they are. But if we're going to make new psalm settings, if we're going to start writing our own songs, then by all means, let's use current language. Let's make these accessible, not catering to the world's standards, but at least, worshiping God in the common language. All right. So that's all very good feedback. So yes, there's a lot of support for the URC Psalter Hymnal Project. There have been many concerns that it will, mess with the Psalter Hymnal and leave us with something that is foreign to us and not faithful to our heritage. And I think those were valid concerns from the hymn proposal, and the Songbook Committee is very aware of them. In the current issue of the Outlook, September-October, there's an article by Reverend Derek Vandermeulen, who's the pastor of the URC in Kauai, and he takes a moment to assure his readers that what they've seen in the hymn proposal isn't going to necessarily reflect the finished product. Now that they're working with the OPC, there's going to be changes made to the hymn proposal, and I would be willing to bet that those changes will bring us more into line with what we have in the Psalter hymnal already. So the biggest development in this area, as I mentioned, was the decision of the URC Synod 2012 to merge efforts with the OPC. And that will help us immensely, because now we're working with another denomination with which we have very close fellowship, and the finished product can benefit many churches, not just our own denomination, but it could become as influential as the Psalter hymnal that we have now, which you can find in other churches. So I'm very grateful for that step, and I'm confident that it will benefit our churches. So as a denomination, that's what we have. We have the hymn proposal to look forward to. And as a church, do you already use some of the hymn proposal songs in worship? Okay, that's great. We do that too. So I would just say try to really be aware of what's going on in that project. You can, the Songbook Committee encourages feedback. I have the email address for the main contact there if you're interested, so come and see me afterwards about that. But the project is expected to be done around 2016, so it's really, 4 years might seem like a long time, but it's really coming soon. So the more familiar we can get with that project now, the smoother a transition it'll be. So that's it. The more familiarity with the hymn proposal we can get, that's great. Now, as an individual church, what else can we do to increase our love of the Psalms? Now, this is my first time visiting your church. I love what I've seen here. It's great to be in another church that worships God faithfully and sings the Psalms, and it's really been an encouragement to me just sitting here playing and hearing you sing. But there's many things that we can do to just increase our appreciation for the Psalms and use them more. Is anyone here a pianist or organist in this church? 1, 2. I see at least 2. That's great. What I've really tried to do since my interest in the Psalms is really just to put my heart into what I play on a Sunday morning. It's such a small thing, but it really helps. I usually try to work with the pastor as soon as he's got the hymns picked. I'll run through them at home. I'll look through the text, see if there's anything, see how the verses mingle with each other, if there's one that's particularly joyful and one that's more downcast, and how I can reflect that in my playing. It's really just a matter of putting thought into what we do. It's not even a definite set of regulations, but just thinking about what we're playing, singing along. That's something that many organists I've talked to encourage me to do. If you're playing, sing along with as you're playing, and that will really bring the words home to you. Now, for all of us, even if you're not a musician, we can benefit so much by making the Psalms part of our own personal devotions. I've started to read a psalm each night before bed. It takes, maybe 60 seconds, 90 seconds if it's a long one. Just making the Psalms a part of our devotional life, it's wonderful. And you can read them, you can pray through them. That's something that's been highly recommended. And even just singing them at home. I know we don't tend to think about singing at home as a regular part of our worship, but it can benefit you so much, especially if you're teaching the Psalms to your children or your teenagers or anyone. It's just a wonderful way to bring them home to us. The other thing is that the Psalms, the more we study and read them, the more we start to realize how they're just applicable for every part of life. And you may have heard the stories of the French Huguenots in Calvin's time. When they were being persecuted and arrested, as they were walking through the streets, they were singing the Genevan Psalms. And that just goes to show us how valuable these people thought the Psalms were. And they are that valuable. So whether it's singing in our youth groups, singing the Psalms in our youth groups, that's might be a strange idea, or teaching them to kids in our Sunday school classes, or just about any area that we can bring that love of the Psalms, we can really have a great impact on the next generation. Do you have any other ways that you could think of that we can start to inculcate that love in the next generation? Yes?
I think it starts down in Sunday school.
Absolutely. Yeah, it starts down in the Sunday school. There's a great book that you may be aware of. It's a little red book. It says "Let Youth Praise Him," and it's got children's songs in it, and they're great children's songs. But it also has psalms, and that's just wonderful. That these kids grew up learning the Psalms and can still sing them by memory today. That's wonderful heritage. I would love to see the URC come out with something like that. Anyone else? The thing is that there's really no hard and fast answer. It's not like if you sing 5 psalms a day, your devotional life will be perfect. But it's just one small area that we can strive to glorify God better. And just in closing, I just wanted to share some of the many encouragements that we've gotten through our work on URC Psalmody. It's really been eye-opening for me, because when I started, I really thought I was the only one. It's like, well, I might as well start a blog and see if anyone else thinks this way. And I've been so tremendously encouraged. I've been talking with a pianist and organist from Burlington, Washington. There's a URC up there. And we've been going back and forth about different ways to incorporate the Psalms into worship. We have the work of Dale Grottenhuis. I don't know if any of you have heard that name. He recently passed away, but his daughter-in-law has been working to manage his music collections, and she's been commenting on the blog, and she's really enthusiastic about getting his music out to more more musicians across the URC. I've been able to talk to a young musician from Thunder Bay, Ontario, the URC up there. She's contacted me through the blog and, just very enthusiastic about the Psalms. We've had contact with multiple members from the URC Songbook Committee. We've had communications with church members from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, California, Arizona, and tons of other places. And every time I'm so encouraged that there are people who think the same way and are committed to worshiping God through the Psalms. One of the biggest encouragements that I found was a blog run by Reformed Presbyterian young people, about a dozen of them, between, I think the youngest was 14 and the oldest was 19. And they run a blog on the Psalms. They just pick a psalm, they write a meditation on it. They have lots of great links. I can give you the link to that blog if you're interested later. And even at RYS, the Reformed Youth Services Convention, there are plenty of other young people out there. You get to meet them sometimes, and it's wonderful. They're walking around with their pocket Psalter hymnals, and they're humming the Psalms, and it's just a wonderful testimony that God is doing something. He seems to be doing something powerful in this generation, and I am thrilled to be a part of it. I'm not sure how much time we have left, because no time left? Okay. Well, it has been very nice talking with you. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have afterwards. And thanks to Jim for this opportunity, and thank you to community. As I said, I never expected to have this privilege, and I pray that God will work mightily in this generation, that we might love the Psalms more.